The deep roots of external validation, how approval shapes our sense of self. Introduction, the quiet hunger for approval. I've spent a long time questioning why people, including myself, often feel an unspoken but persistent pull toward external validation. It's not something we openly admit, yet it dictates our choices in ways we don't always recognize. The subtle tension before hitting send on a message, the way our mood shifts based on how someone reacts to us, the quiet satisfaction of a compliment or conversely the sting of being overlooked. These moments reveal how deeply woven external validation is into our everyday experience. We all want to be seen, acknowledged, recognized, and at some level accepted. There is no shame in that. It's built into us. The problem arises when our sense of worth becomes too entangled with how others perceive us. When validation stops being a natural part of human interaction and starts dictating our identity, we lose something fundamental, our inner autonomy. This book is not about rejecting validation entirely. That would be both unrealistic and unnecessary. Instead, it's about understanding why we crave it so deeply, how it subtly shapes the way we see ourselves, and most importantly, how to untangle our self-worth from the shifting tides of external approval. Chapter 1. The Origins of Our Need for Validation. If we want to understand why we seek validation, we have to start at the beginning, before we were even aware of ourselves as individuals. Human beings are social creatures, and survival has always depended on being accepted by the group. Historically, rejection was not just painful, it was dangerous. Being cast out meant being left vulnerable. That's not just a poetic metaphor, it's an evolutionary fact. This biological need for connection laid the groundwork, but it was our early experiences, especially in childhood, that truly cemented the idea that our worth was tied to external approval. Think about it. As children, our survival and well-being were directly linked to whether our caregivers provided for us, and in most cases, approval became the currency of that provision. We were praised for good behavior and corrected, or worse, ignored for bad behavior. Love often felt conditional, even in the best of circumstances. Even beyond family, school reinforced this further. We learned that certain actions earned gold stars, high grades, and admiration, while others led to disapproval or punishment. In small, seemingly harmless ways, we were conditioned to measure our value through the reactions of others. But here's the problem. When self-worth is constructed from these external markers, it remains fragile. It is not rooted in anything unshakable. It fluctuates based on circumstances, opinions, and validation that is always subject to change. Chapter 2. The Thin Line. Between healthy validation and dependence. Not all validation is harmful. In fact, some forms of external validation are necessary. We thrive on meaningful relationships, and part of those relationships involves recognizing and affirming one another. But there's a thin, often imperceptible line between receiving validation and relying on it. Healthy validation is acknowledgement. It is when someone sees you, appreciates you, and affirms your presence without it defining your identity. It's when praise is welcome but not needed. Unhealthy validation, on the other hand, is dependency. It's when self-worth becomes fragile in the absence of praise. It's when criticism, no matter how constructive, feels like a personal attack. It's when the fear of disapproval controls your choices, shaping you into what others expect rather than who you truly are. This dependency often manifests in ways we don't immediately recognize. It's not always about obvious approval-seeking behavior. Sometimes it looks like perfectionism, working tirelessly to maintain an image that will be admired. Other times it appears as people-pleasing, sacrificing personal desires to avoid conflict. And in some cases it can take the opposite form, rebellious defiance that is still, at its core, a reaction to external judgment. The common thread? A self-worth that is reactive rather than grounded, a self that is constantly adjusting to match external expectations rather than internal truth. Chapter 3. Reclaiming Self-Worth from the Grip of Approval. Breaking free from external validation isn't about becoming indifferent to others. It's about shifting the center of gravity from out there to within. The first step is awareness. Begin to notice when you are acting from a place of seeking validation rather than genuine desire. Ask yourself, if no one were watching, would I still do this? If there were no praise or approval at stake, would I make the same choice? Am I doing this because it aligns with who I am or because it aligns with what is expected of me? These questions are deceptively simple, but they expose the unconscious patterns that often dictate our behavior. The next step is building internal validation. This doesn't happen overnight, and it's not about just believing in yourself. It's about reinforcing the idea that your worth is not up for negotiation. One of the most powerful ways to do this is through personal integrity, by committing to things not because they will be approved of, but because they matter to you. Start small. Choose one area of life where you usually seek external validation and intentionally detach from it. Maybe it's social media, posting only when you truly feel like sharing, not when you crave likes. Maybe it's work, offering an idea without fearing whether it will be well received. Maybe it's relationships, expressing disagreement instead of suppressing your voice. Each of these actions is a step towards self-reliance, a shift in focus from external measurement to internal grounding. Chapter 4. Living Beyond the Need for Validation. Once you start detaching from external validation, something interesting happens. You begin to feel lighter. The weight of constant self-monitoring lessens. You start making choices that align with you rather than an imagined audience. This isn't about isolation or becoming immune to others' opinions. It's about putting them in their rightful place. Opinions exist, and they will always exist, but they no longer need to govern you. One of the biggest misconceptions about breaking free from external validation is that it means not caring at all. That's not the goal. The goal is to care differently, to shift from seeking approval to valuing connection, to welcome recognition when it comes but remain unshaken when it doesn't. Because in the end, the most powerful validation is not the one that comes from others. It is the quiet, steady knowing within yourself that says, I am enough. Conclusion: walking your own path. This is not an overnight transformation. It is a gradual process of unlearning, of loosening the grip of old conditioning. But each step in the right direction reinforces itself. With time, you will notice the changes: less hesitation, more confidence, decisions made without second-guessing, a sense of self that feels steady rather than fluctuating. External validation is not the enemy. The problem is when it becomes the measure of our worth. The good news is you already have everything you need to break free. The only approval that truly matters, the only one that can never be taken away, is the one you give yourself. And that is something no one else can grant or deny.